Welcome to Situational Awareness Tactics Podcast. This podcast provides the crucial art of understanding current elements in an environment to increase your safety and survival. Here's your host, forensic psychologist and consultant, Dr. Carlos.
Welcome back, everybody. Well, we have a returning guest for his third time here.
Wow.
And it's Ernest Emerson. That's right. Wow is right, Ernest. Thank you so much again for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Well, I'm just amazed you want to have me back for the third time, Doctor. I appreciate that a lot, and I hope everybody else enjoys it as well.
They have, very much so. And again, folks, you can find him at Real Ernest Emerson, E-M-E-R-S-O-N, on Instagram. You can also find him at Emerson Knives, Inc., E-M-E-R-S-O-N, Knives, Inc., I-N-C. You'll definitely want to check out his Instagram pages and his knives. He has an amazing knife collection. Really great stuff.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. You also have a podcast, if I remember correctly.
I'm sorry?
You also have a podcast?
Yes, but it's been sleeping recently just because of everything that's going on and shifted gears. But, yeah, we will get that going up again, for sure.
Absolutely.
I'll keep you posted.
Absolutely. Please let me know. Well, I know today we're going to be talking about, since you own knives, you've been highly regarded as a knife expert. Our task today is to talk about kind of the psychology of knives and what they make people think and feel. I guess is the discussion. I know we can have these discussions. We've had a little bit of them before. That's why I enjoy these conversations with you. So knives have a history. Obviously been the number one weapon for centuries. Do you think, well, let's go this way. What do you know about the history of knives and knife fighting?
Well, I know a little bit, let's just say that. And it's, I believe the knife is, people say it's man's oldest tool. I think that just a plain old stick was man's probably first tool, and maybe a rock was number two, but knives were right behind that. And when I say knives, in those days, the Stone Age, if you will, of course it was a flinted or a chipped piece of chert or flint that produced a razor edge, and you were able to use it to skin and do all those other things, cut food or whatever. But at the same time, you could defend yourself with them because all of God's animals have teeth and claws, and we kind of came up a little short in that regard. So we had to look for an outside source to give us our teeth and our claws, and the knife became kind of that tool. So again, it's one of those things that goes back to before man was man. Because again, if you look at the way back, millions of years, the early hominids were using sharp stones or sharp flint or whatever, glass, obsidian, to as a tool. And I'm sure that when someone else wanted, one of my friends told me one time, he said, Ernie, wrestling or fighting was invented when two cavemen chased after a deer, and the first one ran over and caught it, and fighting began when the second guy caught. And so whether it's knives or sticks or stones, it goes all the way back to the beginning of mankind, and it's just one of those universal things. And I believe the reason that it is because there will always be a use for knives. It will never go away. We could be on Star Trek land, and you'll still need a knife to cut something with. And I think that's the key to the survival of the knives. Forbes did a thing one time where they it was either Forbes or one of the, maybe Scientific American, I can't remember. They did a poll of all these famous scientists and philosophers and anthropologists and all these really lofty people, and had them list the man's 10 greatest inventions. And sure enough, the knife was number one.
The knife was number one? Wow.
Yep, greatest invention, because it led to all of the other things that we were able to do. So the problem is because with knives and the way that they became weapons was there's always bad guys. As long as there's been mankind, there's been good guys and there's been bad guys. And so, like I said, arming ourselves with our outside, tooth and nails and claws, the knife became that device.
And folks, the topics we're going to cover today, we're going to talk a little bit about different types of knives, what they're good for. We're also going to be talking about the psychology behind knives in the sense of knife fighting. What does it mean to the victim? What does it mean to the offender? And then we'll also take a look at a little bit of situational awareness, some of the tips. We had an earlier conversation before the podcast, Ernest and I did about it, and I think it would be great to share here. So first thing, Ernest, there are a lot of different types of knives. I think we might have mentioned this in the very first podcast we did, but we didn't really go too deep into it. I want to see if we can go a little bit deeper today. So we see all the different types. We've seen fixed blades, we've seen fold, we've seen karambits, you name it. So let's start off with this. What is the most, let's see how I would start with this. What knife do you think is the most practical and it has the most functionality that can be used for various sorts of things?
Well, I could say the Swiss Army knife because that's pretty universally used by people. But I'm going to get a little bit bigger, and I would say a folding knife, and I'll tell you the reason why. Because a folding knife is in most times and places, it's a socially acceptable thing to have in your pocket. A fixed blade, where you might say fixed blade is always better than a folding knife because it does not have a mechanical function, which, as we all know, Murphy steps in when anything moves or has a mechanical pivot or anything like that. There's a chance for mechanical failure. But with a fixed blade, of course, there isn't. But at the same time, me showing up with a Bowie knife strapped to my leg to go to the movies, probably not going to go over all that well. But even in a suit coat, I can have a little knife tucked down in my pocket, or one like a Spyderco or an Emerson or a Buck or any of those that have the clips on them that you can clip to your pants. It's no longer a socially, I guess it never was a socially acceptable thing to have a jackknife, if you will, in your pocket. So the thing about knives in that regard is it has to be something. Let's just go there for a second. People say, what's the best self-defense knife you can own? And I always tell them, look, here's what it is. It's the knife you have in your pocket or in your hand when you need to use it in self-defense, when you're being attacked. So if you were to say to me, Ernie, what kind of knife should I carry? I would say, Dr. Carlos, you should carry the knife that you're going to have with you all of the time. So it might not be a great big bulky quote-unquote fighting knife. It might just be a smaller knife that you can comfortably carry, but you need to have something with you because you don't get to pick the place. We're the good guys.
Absolutely. Now, here's some of the arguments, not some of the arguments, but some of the debates that I see out there. What are the differences between and I know it's always depending on context, but we'll say for fighting first and then maybe survival next, but between a fixed blade and a folding blade, does it make a difference when it comes to self-defense?
Yes and no, and that's kind of an ambiguous answer for sure. I guess can't get more ambiguous. But,
you're a politician these days, Ernest.
A blade will work just as well as, let me start that again. A folding knife will work just as well as a fixed blade if it is a strong, locked open, rigid of knife. In other words, you don't want a slip joint knife if you're in a tussle with somebody because it can get knocked on the blade and it can close on your own hand. Or you could run it into something. Let's say if someone you hit the belt buckle or something like that in a fight. You could close that knife by accident. A good folding knife with a good, I hate to use the word lock, it's a good mechanism to keep it open, will work just as good as a fixed blade. The thing that comes with a fixed blade, though, is the confidence that it will never fold or it will never close by accident. So, again, yes and no. It's going to come down to what knife you're going to carry. If you lived in a society like the Gurkhas where you all had the kukri, that would be, you probably wouldn't find a lot of people with folding knives. And that would be the answer then, would be a good a well-made kukri, if you will. If you're in an urban environment, it's going to have to be a folding knife because there's just a stigma against walking around with a buck 110 fixed blade.
No, I can see that. I don't think, and they're not allowed in a lot of places either. I don't think, are they?
I'm sorry, they're not illegal, or
are they illegal in a lot of states?
Well, they're not, but it's a social stigma, and again, it's like carrying a gun in a holster on the outside. There's places where that's totally acceptable, and then there's places where it's probably not quite as totally acceptable, even though it might be 100% legal. And again, we don't want to draw attention to ourselves, and we don't want to make people uncomfortable. There's no reason for me to exhibit what I am armed with at any time until I need to use that arm, whatever it be. So, again, I got it. There's an intimidation thing sometimes, that people kind of fall into. But I've never had to do that. I've never brandished a weapon ever in any situation. So I think it's always best to have something that the enemy doesn't know you have.
That's a great point. Concealment is going to be a little bit of a problem with a machete. Let me ask you this. Teeth or no teeth? That's another concern for a lot of people in regards to blade design, whether it's serrated or straight edge. What do you think?
Well, I have a strong opinion on that, and my opinion is it doesn't matter, because I'll tell you, I've taken people in class, and I have said, look, hear the old story about serrations will get hung up on bone and sinew and leather and clothing and all that, and I'll take someone, out of the class up in me, and I'll have them hold a punching mitt, a focus mitt, on their chest, and then I'll take just a dummy knife of any type, and I will strike them in the chest with it hard. I mean, rock their world hard, and then I ask, do you think that knife strike would have gotten hung up on cloth or bone or sinew? And the answer is no. And the thing is that a lot of misinformation is out there. The thing about serrations is this: they pretty much never go dull unless you're really cutting something that's going to dull any knife, no matter what. So that I always tell people, look, you're way more likely to have to use that knife in an emergency situation, i.e. running up on a car accident or something where you've got to get somebody out of a seatbelt or whatever. Serrations will cut like crazy. A knife sometimes, people say, my knife, I keep it so sharp that I can do this or that. I'll tell you what, cutting wet nylon, that's a tough thing to cut sometimes. And I've seen sharp knives slide right across nylon webbing and stuff like that without really taking a bite out of it. But a serrated knife, wham, cuts it like butter.
Interesting. And I guess that leads me to my next question as we're getting deeper into the knives. The quality of the blade steel. Some people wonder, should you use carbon? Other people say, if it's made of too high a carbon, that could be corrosive. What's your take on the quality of steel?
Well, all my guns rust, and they don't have any rust on them. So, my whole take on it is, the best steel that in my personal opinion, of course, and this is just my opinion, the best steel that's ever been made for a knife is just plain old, they used to call it 1095 or W1 or W2, 01 tool steel. Those are very, very simple steels. There's not much in them except iron and carbon. And, a file is made out of what they call W1 or W2, and that knife, or that file, is as basic a steel as exists. It's the same thing that the original blacksmiths used tens of thousands of years ago when they were first starting to forge steel. And what does a file do? A file cuts other steel. So that's how good that steel is. Now, I got it. People don't maintain their weapons as often as they should. And in regard to a knife, if you're going to throw it in your tackle box and it's wet and all that, you don't want to come back and not be able to open it because it's rusted shut. So there are many, many good stainless steels out there. They've gotten to the point now where they have refined a lot of the formulas so that they have a high carbon, because the carbon is necessary to form the carbides and other, I guess, crystalline structures that go into making a steel hard versus soft. In other words, pre-heat treat and after heat treat and tempering. And you can pretty much, if you buy a knife from a reputable company, and I'm talking Buck, Benchmade, Emerson, Spyderco, Columbia River, any of those guys, they're all using the top quality steels. They're always looking to give something good to their customers that they can depend on in all regards, whether it's a tool or whatever. So my own opinion on steels, I don't give a damn. It's kind of basic to say that, but I really don't, because again, if it's heat treated properly and I know it comes from a good source, it's going to do whatever I need to do with it.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. And the last thing I wanted to do as we get into the weeds here is easy opening. I know there's a manual folding knife, there's the assisted opening folding knife, and there's like what they call them, the old switchblades. Maybe even the double actions, but I guess those are illegal everywhere, unless you're military. Yeah. What do you think about those three? Does it make a big difference or not?
Well, again, I'm a real basic guy, and that's just born out of a practical exposure to, if something can go wrong, it goes wrong at some point. I grew up on a dairy farm. I've broken more things than I've fixed, but I've fixed a lot of things that were broke. And when you complicate anything, i.e. add springs, add buttons, add all of the different mechanisms that sometimes are on some of these different knives, you are introducing the probability of mechanical failure at some point. And again, if it's a self-defense situation or an emergency situation, never, ever want that knife to fail. So, springs and buttons, I got it. We're going to be releasing a brand new Emerson automatic knife in the next few weeks. So I understand that, and they're cool, and I like them. But I'm still basically thumb opening, whether you use some type of an assisted opening, i.e. a wave feature or a catch on the back of the blade or your thumb. You need to be able to access a knife with one hand, because sometimes, let's say you're in a car accident and you're rolled over on the side and you've got another person laying on top of you or whatever, and you only have that one arm free. You need to be able to that, open it with one hand, if you will, and extricate yourself or help that other person or whatever. Your arm could be incapacitated. I mean, there's a million reasons why I think one-handed knife opening styles are important. But at the same time, something that's simple in the long run will, it's not going to fail, and that's kind of what it comes down to. So
that's a great point. It's a great point. You know what? And it gives me close to our segue to the psychology of knives, but we get there. Mm-hmm. Any knife from the Emerson knives that you have, you can find these folks online. Would you recommend for survivalists? I'm talking more about people who, like you said, get stuck in the car, have to cut off the seat belt, have to cut more aggressive materials or more dense or thick materials. Any knives that you recommend from your collection?
Well, I would recommend a knife that, again, I think I've mentioned this to you a long time ago. I was a 1911 guy, and I just loved the John Browning's design. I thought it was a fantastic weapon. I love the 1911s, and I have more than I probably should, but I remember the first time I picked up a Glock, and I was like, oh my God, it feels like he made this gun for me. You need to do the same thing with a knife. That's why we make a variety of different styles, just like all the other knife companies do. Find one that fits you, that fits into your hand. Like I said, all the other knife companies, they all make good designs. They're all well made with state-of-the-art materials these days. I don't want to brag on ourselves, but we make a lot of good knives too. But we make a wide variety because, Doctor, I've never met you in person. You might be 6'7" tall, and I don't know that.
That's right.
I'm 5'7". So the knife that I would say, hey, you should always carry one of these, you may go, man, I can't even find it when I put it in my paw. So again, I hate being so nebulous about this, but pick a knife that you like and fits you, and you have found the absolute perfect knife for you to carry in an emergency situation.
Great advice. So now we're switching over to the psychology aspect of it. I know this is one of the things we've talked about extensively in the past. We never really got into why people are so afraid of knives. I understand the danger of them, but even people with guns seem to look at them and react differently.
Well,
and they both can kill you, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a couple, and again, this is just me talking off the top of my head, if you will. I do believe in the theory of genetic memory. So I think that we all carry kind of a remembrance, if you will, about things that go, why are some people afraid of different things? I don't know, but sometimes I think a lot of it has to go back with over the millennia. We all know what a knife can do. We've all used them. They all used them to skin animals, and people were fighting with knives, i.e. swords and things like that, for tens of thousands of years. So I think there might be that kind of a collective thing going on.
Collective
but
unconscious.
At the same, pardon?
Collective unconscious. You're going Jungian on me now, yes.
Oh, yeah, sometimes. But I also think this. We've all been cut. We have had paper cuts. We have had, you've been cut when you fell down and skinned your knee. We all know what that feels like. We all know what a knife will do because we cut open cardboard boxes and things all day long. And if you're a hunter and things like that, you know exactly what knives will do to flesh and bone. And if you're a bad guy, you also know what they'll do to flesh and bone. So I think that most people have never been shot, but we've all been cut at some point. And we've all been around people that had to, quote unquote, get stitches, although most of us have never been around somebody who's been, suffered a gunshot wound, unless you're in the military or police or something really bad is in your life. So I think there's just an exposure that a knife will cut. And we know, even though we may not have suffered severe injury from the cuts that we've had, we imagination that will, you look at a knife and you go, oh my gosh, that would do a lot more than the paper cut I had, 2 weeks ago. So I think that's part of it also, Doctor.
That's a great point. No, you're absolutely right. I can see that collective inherent, almost like a genetic predisposition to fear knives. Yeah. And they're painful because even when people have guns, I mean, they look at it and they realize this is not good. But the other side of it, too, we talked about it before, is the personal side. Because if you're the offender, or even if you're in self-defense, killing somebody with a knife is bloody, messy, and an ugly process.
Well, that's a touchy-feely thing, too. I mean, you can shoot somebody from a long ways away. And again, let me add something to that also. A gun is a mechanical device. Knife has a sharp edge and a point on it, and there's a psychological impact that has to go with that also. But at the same time, a fight like with a knife is nothing more than a fight. It's a fight when some person has a sharp object in their hand, and that's really kind of the if you think of how close you have to be, and how fights will always, almost without exception, progress to a wrestling match, if you will, or grappling. That's how close you are, whether you have a knife or not. Now, I'm not talking about an assassination or coming up from behind somebody on a sentry takedown or something like that, or a bad guy sneaking up behind somebody who's staying at a urinal or something like that. But, we do know that you got to be touching the other person to touch them with a knife, basically. And again, people talk when you talked about the right, oh, well, I only want a knife that's got a blade that's 13 inches long because I don't have to get as close to the guy. Not so, Kwai Chang, because what happens is you're going to be close. They're going to close the distance, or you're going to inadvertently close the distance, and that 13-inch time will now become an encumbrance rather than something that you could wield when you and I are pressed chest to chest. So
that's the other thing that amazes me when you see these videos online about these fights that happen. And we'll talk about the fake martial arts too. That was really interesting. We talked about it before, but when you see some of these fights where people are, obviously they're starting to have an argument that starts getting heated, and then they start butting heads, and they don't realize when you're that close, as you said, less than 12 inches apart. That's pretty easy to knife out and stab the other person when one person's not thinking about it.
Well, not only that, but you can't once you've closed the distance to under about let's say 5 to 6 feet or so. It's tough to have a complete visual image of the person. In other words, the closer I get to you, the narrower my field of view is going to be about you. In other words, when we're head to head, I can only see your face. When I'm an arm length away, I'm pretty much only looking at you from about the waist up. So again, I can't see what you're doing. I can't even see that you're reaching for something, whether it's a concealed firearm or a knife or anything. So again, the thing about a knife is there is no knife fighting. There's fighting with knife. And that's the difference that I think people have to understand to really, I guess, go to that next level of reality in their training.
You mean that Steven Seagal movie Under Siege where he has that knife fight with Tommy Lee Jones wasn't real?
Well, there's a lot of things that are not real in regard to Steve.
That's one of my favorite scenes,
I don't meet him in back alley someday because he's a great big guy, but yeah.
Yeah, he is. He's got great wrist locks, too.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. This kind of goes to the conversation we were having before about situational awareness. And we were talking about, believe it or not, people, we were talking about bathrooms, public bathrooms, I guess more so. What was your story in regards to that and knife stabbings and whatnot?
Well, one of the I knew a guy who had been in the joint, and he turned out to be a pretty squared away guy. He had done his time. It was, he didn't go in on a bogus rap. He went on something serious, but he wasn't a bad guy through and through. So he came out, I guess, on the good end of the prison system. But we had a lot of conversations because he was a member of a motorcycle club and all that. So he'd seen his share of real harsh reality. Let's just say that. And he told me, he said, Ernie, one of the things is a lot of guys will get attacked, whether it's with a knife or a shiv or just a pummeling, if you will, when they're in the bathroom. Because when you're at the urinal, he said it's very, very easy to come up from behind and attack someone without them being aware. They can't see you. But the other thing, too, is that most men will not let go of their, let's call it their unit, while they're taking a leak. And even when they're being hit, they will still maintain a hold of their unit. Maybe it's an instinctual protective thing that all men have, but he said that is a perfect ambush site.
I think it probably is an instinctual one. Absolutely. And I know, I'm sure a lot of listeners are protecting now.
Cringing.
Yeah. And I know they always tell you to go in the stalls, right? That's one of the things they always tell you. Use the stalls, don't use the urinals.
I never use a urinal. It's just very uncomfortable. And again, you know what I'm talking about. Things bother me that might not bother normal people or the average person, let's just say that, because I have made myself so situationally aware of everything that I do, whether it's tactical parking or restaurants, movies, et cetera, that when I go into a bathroom and I see all the stalls are occupied, I really feel a little uncomfortable. I always go all the way to the wall, so then turn and I know that I'm going to have at least a wall behind me. So I always go to the end urinal, but it's a weird thing, and maybe some people think I'm a little odd to be that paranoid, but I'm telling you right now, if I can prevent it, I'm never going to be caught off guard.
Absolutely. That's the difference, right? Even if it doesn't happen 99 out of 100 times, that one time, you'll never have to worry about it again, unfortunately, if they kill you.
Doc, what will happen is you'll get hit 3 or 4 times before you even know you're being hit. Now, if there's a knife on the end of that hit, any one of those could be a fatal blow.
Do you by chance know how many knife blows a person can get in, even if they're not skilled, within 10, 15 seconds? I've heard a couple different numbers.
Well, 10 or 15 seconds, probably 3 to 4 times longer than a fight will even last.
Okay.
If you can take your fingers and pretend you're a drummer and go, that's about how fast you can move. Because again, think that you're fully extending your arm out to complete arm's reach and then retracting it all the way and then sticking it all the way out again. It's not like that at all. It's a little staccato burst. Ba-ba-ba-ba-bam. And that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just me saying that's about how fast you can poke whether it's a pen or a shiv or a sharp, a sharp piece of steel or a knife. That's about how fast that happens. And, it takes the human mind about 1/5 of a second to react from a stimulus. Now, you know more about this than I do. Maybe I'm incorrect, but if I were to reach out, and you in the ribs, it probably takes about 1/5 of a second for that stimulus to reach your brain, and then you've got to go through the OODA loop and everything else that's going on. It's like, what happened? Why did it happen? What am I going to do? All that good stuff. So if you take and you do 5 of those in a second, you're in a world of hurt right away.
And if they know what they're doing, they're going to be hitting spots.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I worked with a guy one time, and he came into work, and I was like, he was all kind of humped over and slumped over and moving real slow. And I said, what the hell happened to you? And he said, man, I was in a fight. And I said, wow, the guy that's broken ribs tonight or what? And he pulled up his shirt, and he had about 15 places where he had bandages and tape and stitches and all that all over his belly. Now, he had a beer gut, let's just say that. But I said, what the hell happened? And he said, I got into a fight with a guy. We were punching, rolling around on the ground. All of a sudden, he got up and ran away. I thought I had rolled over on a sprinkler head or something because I felt my belly button was all wet. And then I looked at it, and it was blood. The guy had pulled out literally a Swiss Army type of knife and had poked him about 15 times, and he didn't even know he was being stabbed. So why are people why is there a fear of the knife? Because that's the way some of this stuff can happen, and it's a rightful fear. There's no question about it.
I think you mentioned in one of our podcasts, too. It's the ubiquity of the knife, too. It's everywhere. It's anywhere. I mean, people can break into your home and grab them in the kitchen.
Oh, for gosh. And again, when you think of it, if police officers dealing with homeless people and or you or I, if, all homeless people are armed, whether it's a sharp screwdriver or a nail, or whatever the heck it happens to be. Could be a knife, could be one of those cheap little steak knives that you get over at the grocery store. But they all have knives. And, nowadays, because I guess a lot of people have knives because it's a useful. And, that's funny. When you mentioned something about the different styles of knives, the karambits and all of these other types that exist out there,
yes, sir.
I wanted to make a mention. One of the things I believe that people not aware of is that almost every quote-unquote fighting knife that exists was originally a tool used in a farming environment. In other words, cutting grain or, cutting palm fronds to build something for your grass skirt or the roof for your hut or whatever it happens to be. If you look at the Japanese weapons, the martial arts weapons, almost all of those were farming implements, the nunchakus, all of that good stuff. So,
really?
Yeah.
That kind of reminds me of that Russian Special Forces shovel.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's
those guys were pretty good with that. I've seen some films.
It's nasty.
Well, think about it. It's like a tomahawk or a hatchet, except it's even a little bit easier to wield around, and it's got an edge that goes all the way around 180 degrees. So
that's a nasty knife.
Yeah.
Ernest, in our last 2 minutes here, or three, I know I'm giving you a lot of time for our last answer, but
no worries.
I want to leave people with a positive note too. Is what can they do in regards to defending against the knife attack? And I know it's hard. You're going to get hurt if you're too close. But I guess I'm assuming one of your answers might be keep as much distance as you can if you feel a threat coming. But do you have any other advice for individuals out there in regards to the knife?
Again, it sounds wrong advice, but yes. Number one, if you stay away from somebody that you think is going to be a problem, they're going to have to make a move to get to you, which gives you a little time to react and maybe get out of the way. If you can't, you're backed up against the wall, or you're caught between two cars or something, and you can't get away, you cannot dance back and forth. I call it crossing no man's land. You can't cross no man's land, cross back, cross no man's land again, because you're going to go through that line of fire every single time. So if you can't create distance, you take the distance away. Because one man told me one time, a real serious guy, he said, Ernie, you have far more to fear from a dangerous man than you do a dangerous weapon. Destroy the man, you destroy the weapon. Destroy the weapon, you still have to deal with the dangerous man. So without getting technical about what kind of techniques you'd have to use, honest, you have to incapacitate a guy wielding that weapon in order to stop the effectiveness of the weapon. If you try and track that knife and do some fancy kind of technique, disarm, whatever, I tell people it's like trying to hit a mosquito with a dart. It ain't going to happen.
I have heard
That's
some people
just the way
say
it is.
You should maybe put your arm up to try to deflect it so it doesn't hit your vital
Well,
parts,
yeah.
or?
Again, if you want to go a little bit towards the technique things, better to get cut on the arm than the neck. Let's just say that.
Yeah, it sounds like logical
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah. Again, let's go there for just a second.
Of course.
Put something between you and the knife, between you and the bad guy, whether it's a paper, a book, your arm, your hat, anything that you can throw at the guy, anything you can do. Because, again, what you want to do is you want to take away his offensive capability. And, again, you and I have talked in the past about the difference. When I attack you, if I'm a bad guy, I'm 100% proactive in what I'm doing. The minute that you can get me to start to react to something you're doing, it diminishes that 100% to 80%, 70%, 60%, whatever. And if you can really turn the tide, I want you to be 100% proactive and me to be on the defense, because then I'm going to lose the fight and the good guy's going to win.
Great advice. And another great interview. Thank you so much, Ernest, again for being here.
I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure, Doctor. You ask very interesting questions, and you lead me down the path where I really enjoy having the conversation with you, man. Thank you.
You're too kind. Thank you again, everybody. Find Ernest Emerson. You can find Emerson Knives. Look them up online. You'll enjoy looking at all the knives that they have. Some great stuff out there. So go catch it, Emerson Knives. Also follow him on Instagram, too. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll catch you next time.